Hello again, and welcome to Jew Can't Handle the Truth. I thought things might get better between the last episode and today, but it seems like things are only getting worse, a little darker, a little stranger. There's now all sorts of chance that Jesus was Palestinian, so that's interesting. Merry Christmas, everybody. Today, I'm going to do something a little different as well. Instead of talking about what's going on in the news, and there is a lot going on, and there is plenty I could say, I want to specifically talk about Jewish Voice for Peace. Just to be clear, this organization is not Jewish, is not our voice, and does not want peace. I know there's a lot going on in regards to Jews and Israel and Palestinians and Gaza and the war with Hamas and all the Jew hatred going on worldwide, but I still felt compelled to talk about Jewish Voice for Peace, aka JVP, today. Someone told me that by dedicating an entire episode to JVP, I was platforming them. I was giving them legitimacy. But I realized the press has been doing that for me. Right now, JVP have been the subjects of articles from the New York Times, NPR, PBS, Reuters, CBS, CNN, Time Magazine, Teen Vogue. I wish I was kidding about that one. And shockingly, the Jew-hating, Qatari-funded Al Jazeera, who seem to be on a consistent mission to see how far they can go into Nazi territory while daring you to call them out for fear of Islamophobia. You don't want to be racist, do you? You better not call out that our headline section looks a lot like the table of contents of Mein Kampf. Shh. Careful, you might get canceled. So why am I talking about this? Why am I taking an entire episode to talk about this random fringe group of crazies made up mostly of Hamas mouthpieces and, yes, admittedly, a few useful idiot, wild leftist, self-hating Jews that don't realize they're being manipulated into sullying the reputation of, dare I say it, actual Jews worldwide? It's because they're one of the worst wolf in sheep's clothing, nasty, Jew-hating organizations in the world today. Even worse, they claim they're doing it on behalf of Jews with the Jewish voice. They do this by lying, claiming that they are not anti-Semitic, not anti-Jewish, merely anti-Zionist, as if there's a difference, and as if they don't actually hate Jews vehemently. And anyway, that's the equivalent of saying, I'm not anti-Black, I'm anti-emancipation. It's total bullshit. And by the way, yes, a moment ago, I did say actual Jews. Let me explain. Before I start, here's my disclaimer. This will probably be offensive to some people. I'm sorry, but reality is reality. Some people claim to be things they're not in order to mask hatred or get away with something. It's just, unfortunately, how humans operate sometimes. So, with that in mind and my pre-apologies in place, what do I mean by actual Jews in relation to JVP? I'll start by saying that, to put it simply, Jewish people are Jewish, which the majority of the members of JVP are absolutely not. When you review the roster of members of JVP, and by the way, that's not a public list, it's really difficult to find. You have to dig, you have to look through everybody's social media to see who's willing to admit it, and many people are not because they want to, again, use that subterfuge to just hate Jews. When you look at that list, you will see a bunch of Muslim, Arab, and Palestinian names on it. Decidedly not Jews. You'll also find a bunch of white supremacists, weirdly also not Jews. And for those that support JVP but are not actually members, you'll also be very hard-pressed to find a lot of Jewish names. Although Ilhan Omar, who they sold merchandise for, Rashida Tlaib, Jeremy Corbyn, Louis Farrakhan, David Duke, they're all big fans. So they've got that going for them, which is nice. Hell, to keep going down this path, even the founders of many of their chapters are not Jewish. It's actually been really difficult to find information on the founders of all of the chapters, which I'm sure is no accident. But here's some anecdotal evidence, and take it as you will. I have looked into double-digit numbers of the chapters of JVP, and of the information I could find, and again, it wasn't easy to find, a mere 5 chapters were founded by Jews. Again, this is anecdotal to me, but I did a lot of research. In fact, many of the chapters that I found were founded by Muslims, Palestinians, and straight-up Jew haters. So let's make that the first category of not an actual Jew in relation to JVP, which is most of the membership. Number 2, there are a bunch of Jews, yes, real Jews who don't know anything about the religion, who don't know the rituals, who haven't taken one single moment in their entire life to even think about the fact that they're Jewish. Maybe they don't even identify as Jewish, even though they are. Basically, people who are real Jews but have ignored Judaism their entire life. And we can split this one into two different categories because some of those Jews are just neutral. They don't care about being Jewish. They don't care about not being Jewish. They have no connection to it. It doesn't mean anything to them. Mostly they just ignore it. Then there's the second category, the real Jews who we can call useful idiots. And understand, I don't mean useful idiot as in the term idiot like dipshit, even though a lot of these people are. I mean the term useful idiot in the espionage, cloak and dagger, like Jean le Carré kind of sense. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, a useful idiot is defined as, and I quote, a person perceived as propagandizing for a cause, particularly an evil cause, originating from a devious or ruthless source, without fully comprehending the cause's goals, and who is cynically being used by the cause's leaders. And if you think about what you've seen lately, that is scarily dead on. These useful idiot Jews think they're doing a couple of things. One, they think they're being good Jews, like the Kapos in Germany in 1938. They think if they shout about how bad the Jews are, how bad Israel is, how much they love the Palestinians, how much they hate what's going on in this war, that they'll be exempt when the purge starts. I guess they didn't read their history and forgot what happened to the Kapos in the camps after 1938, which just goes to show that those who don't know their history or decided to ignore it are doomed to repeat it. A good example of a useful idiot Jew is this guy I saw on Joe Rogan recently, a guy named Dave Smith. Now, I don't know Dave Smith. I don't know who he is. He's meaningless to me. I read somewhere that he's a comedian, although nothing that he said or did seemed to indicate that, because he was in no way funny or even a little bit amusing. I didn't smirk, smile, or laugh even once during his entire performance. But Joe Rogan does have 10 million viewers, so somehow what this guy says matters. He started off, as all useful idiot Jews do, by saying, I'm Jewish, which is kind of like, here's my license to be able to badmouth Jews. Now we're off to the races. Once his I'm allowed to be a Jew hater bona fides were in place, he went on a 7-minute rant about Israel and Palestine that was so ill-informed, so wrong-headed, so wildly off the mark that it felt like he was teaching from a UN-issued Palestinian textbook. It was frankly shocking. And the more shocking thing was when I watched it on YouTube, all the comments underneath it were like, thanks for telling the whole truth, bro, and all this other stuff that just shows that people were looking for a narrative that would allow them to continue hating Jews. And here's a Jew giving you an opportunity to do so, kind of like what Seth Rogen did. And this Dave Smith guy was wrong about everything. He was wrong about the founding of the country. He was wrong about the 6-Day War. He was wrong about what's going on today in the region. Every single thing he said, in terms of the facts, just all incorrect information. And the more I listened to the guy, the more I realized, I think it's deliberate. I think this was his coming out party as a good Jew. I'm one of the good ones now. You know, like Seth Rogen, you can watch my movies. Don't worry. No, listen to my podcast. No, watch me on Rogan. Don't worry. You don't have to cancel me. I hate them too. So guys, I'm just like you. I hate Jews also. Come on, be my friend. Desperation. You could smell it while he was talking. So that's the useful idiot Kapos. I also like to call them Ginos, Jew in name only. They retweet JVP. They maybe march alongside them. They certainly spread their hateful message. Another segment of the real Jews but not brigade are those people who may have been born Jewish but vehemently reject their own race, reject their own blood, reject their own lineage. They're way worse than Ginos. They are, to coin a horrible acronym, Jowhaj, Jews only when hating on Jews. Now, this one is really evil. For instance, that bigoted, racist asshole Boots Riley, who decries the war on terrorism while actively supporting the terrorists. He really gets into it too, ignoring the violence perpetrated against the Jews, pretending history doesn't exist, conflating innocent hostages with convicted terrorist prisoners. That guy is working overtime to end the Jewish state in general. And how does he get away with being a flagrant Jew hater, spouting borderline Nazi talking points? By talking about his Holocaust survivor grandma, of course. I mean, she actually left Germany before the Holocaust even started, so it's technically a lie, but whatever, I'll let him have it. More importantly, he never gave a shit about being Jewish until he realized, oh, I can use this bloodline I never gave a shit about to hate on the Jewish people, to hate on Israel. I can use this as a weapon, and voila, now he's Jewish in every other tweet. Tweets that claim, for instance, that Muslims are the real Jews and that the Jews that we know today are just Europeans that came over and took over other people's land. He also justifies what happened on October 7th. He accuses Jews of rape. He accuses Jews of genocide. He accuses Jews of war crimes, and basically runs the entire Hamas propaganda playbook, all while marching and protesting with JVP, as a Jew. Then there's the final category of not an actual Jew, and surprise, surprise, they're not actually Jews. These are people that pretend to be Jewish just to be able to say nasty shit about Jewish people. They literally pretend to be Jewish in the public sphere just so they can spew hate and say, that's my people, I'm allowed to say it. This extends to a bunch of people who work with JVP. For instance, Julia Salazar, who isn't Jewish, but claimed to be, when she wrote an article for the Columbia Spectator, starting off with, as a Jew. Or Rebecca Pierce, who identified as Jewish, her words, just in time to join Students for Justice in Palestine, march against the Jews, and actually write an essay about how much she loved terrorists. Or, my personal favorite, Hassan Fauda, the former chair of the Palestinian Right to Return Coalition, and a huge supporter of terrorist Sheikh Raed Salah, whose group was outlawed because of their ties to the Muslim Brotherhood and, Hamas. Now, he didn't claim to be Jewish in an article. He didn't write something saying, as a Jew. Instead, he was seen just 2 months ago marching with JVP wearing a kippah, pretending to be Jewish in public. By the way, there are a bunch of stories of non-Jews putting on a kippah, putting on Jewish garb, wearing those shirts that say, not in our name, as they march with JVP, and they're not Jewish. They're just lying about it. As a side note, one of my favorite things about the research that I did for this episode was finding all the pictures of non-Jews pretending to be Jews marching because they don't know how to wear the stuff. So there's a bunch of pictures of people wearing the talit, but instead of wearing it as a prayer shawl, they're wearing it like a Superman cape, literally tying it here and wearing it as a cape draped over their back, because they're fucking morons. One more in this category, and then I'll move on, I promise. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention at least one more person who is publicly a super fake Jew. I'm, of course, talking about the praying to be relevant again, empty vessel meat puppet known as Cynthia Nixon. She just loves going on talk shows and talking about her Holocaust survivor parents who, just check my notes here, were born in Texas and Chicago. That's weird. I don't remember where the Holocaust happened, but I don't think it was in Texas or Chicago. I don't have proof of this, and so I'm just speaking personally. My opinion is I think she's lying. I don't think her parents were Holocaust survivors at all. I think she's using that as a mallet to be able to hit people over the head with her points. I think that's what I'm going to go with. Personally, again, my opinion is that she's a liar that's using the fiction of her Holocaust survivor parents to be able to hate Jews publicly and say bad things about Israel. Speaking of Cynthia Nixon lying, she presents as a Jew using very careful wording. As a mother to Jewish children, she says over and over and over again, online, in her tweets, verbally, when she's on talk shows. She's always making that comment, as a mother to Jewish children. Why not just say as a Jewish person or as a Jewish mother or as someone with a Jewish family because she's not Jewish. I don't think anyone realizes that as she goes on and on about her Holocaust survivor parents from the States and her Jewish children. She also leaves out that her grandfather was a non-Jewish German named Adolf. Oops. Anyway, she's a big fan of Israel not going after the terrorists who would destroy the Jewish state if given the chance. By the way, quick detour here, just as a side note about Nixon. She's a massive liar when it comes to all sorts of different things, especially when it comes to this particular conflict. So she doesn't just lie about her Judaism. She lies about all sorts of things. For instance, she went on network television and regurgitated Hamas's lies about the number of dead, claiming that 16,000 people were dead in the conflict. Now, she completely forgot to mention that those numbers came directly from the terrorists, who we have proof have been lying about all of their numbers since day one. But even if those numbers were true, she also didn't mention that the 16,000 would include both terrorists and civilians, and also would include any attacks by Israel, in addition to any rocket misfires, which again, we have proof has happened at least 500 times since the beginning of this conflict, killing thousands. Not to mention that we also know that Hamas loves killing their own kind who try to escape from war zones, and there's video of this. So I guess she just forgot those parts, and no one challenged her, of course. She also made some comment about how Israel had killed more people in this conflict than in the US-Afghanistan war. Again, that Hamas made-up number was 16,000, and we know that in the US-Afghanistan war, between 100,000 to 400,000 people had been killed. So wildly a lie. And again, no one challenged her. Great job, The View. Now a bunch of people got stupider and more anti-Jewish, thanks to this half-wit non-Jew and her talk show accomplices. Anyway, let's get back to JVP. When I have these conversations, and yes, I have them a lot, one argument that I get is that JVP may only have a small number of Jews in their ranks comparatively, but they still represent some Jews. I'm told their board of directors is made up of Jews, and some famous ones. And yeah, that's true. I can't deny that whatever shadowy operation is behind JVP, they knew enough to put the famous useful idiots up front. They've got Noam Chomsky, the left's version of Alex Jones. They've got Tony Kushner, and while he's a brilliant playwright, he hates Judaism and Israel so much that when he wrote Steven Spielberg's Munich, a movie about the assassination of 11 Israeli Olympians and their coach at the 1972 Olympics, he somehow made the Israeli Mossad agent taking out the terrorists the morally dubious one. You've got to try real hard to make the Israelis the bad guys in that equation, but this self-hating Jew, he succeeded. My point is, while there are a few disparate self-hating Jews in groups like this, like JVP and Natura Carta and If Not Now, this is super fringe stuff. They do not represent a massive majority within the Jewish community. I compare it to Mormons who practice polygamy. Are there some people out there who have multiple wives who call themselves Mormon? Yeah, sure, but according to the church, the practice was abolished in 1890, and the people doing it today have nothing to do with the religion and are not connected in any way, shape, or form to the Church of Latter-day Saints. Think about that comparison for a minute. A bunch of people will say, yeah, Mormons, there are still Mormons out there who practice polygamy, there's still Mormons who have multiple wives, but there aren't. Some rando cult out there does, and just because they call themselves Mormons doesn't mean we have to believe them, and it doesn't mean we have to acknowledge that they are what they say they are. You see the connection? I think you see the connection. Let's assume you're on board. Let's assume that you agree that this group does not represent Jews. Why am I still talking then? Why is this episode not over? Because the group is getting a tremendous amount of press. And that press keeps calling them Jewish activists or Jewish groups, or that what they're doing has something to do with Jewish values, and they're painting all Jews with that brush. Let's go back to the beginning. If you do research on this organization, as I have, you will be hard-pressed to find exactly who founded the organization. They hide that information really, really, really well. It's conspicuously absent from the About Us section. You have to go deep into the FAQs, and then they mention some stuff that actually isn't true. They mention a lot why they were founded and what they stand for now. They even sometimes mention when they were founded, but the who? It's a big question mark a lot of the time. There's a bunch of misinformation in the press and floating around the internet about who founded the group. Lies, no doubt, put out by the very people who don't want that information to be discovered. On Wikipedia, for instance, they list board members, current board members, as founders, which obviously is false. Even those board members acknowledge that they didn't found the organization. In fact, some of the board members disagree with some of the platform tenets. Again, you really have to do some digging, but you can find articles that will say that Julia Kaplan or Julie Inney or Rachel Eisner founded the organization in 1996, but this isn't exactly accurate either. The very same year, 1996, there was an article by the Jewish News of California that says that Julie Inney and Rebecca Eisner are members of the organization, decidedly not founders. As for Julia Kaplan, who actually wrote on her bio on the website for the Public Health Institute, where she's the State of Equity Program Director, that she founded an organization called A Jewish Voice for Peace. That A makes a big difference. It's doing a lot of heavy lifting because it is not the same organization that exists today. When that group was founded, it was all about trying to push Netanyahu and Clinton to adhere to the Oslo Accords, to make them work. They wanted peace. Those accords had been signed 3 years earlier, and there was a little bit of fear that Netanyahu and Clinton wouldn't stick to the plan. According to Kaplan, they formed specifically because Netanyahu had opened up the caverns under the Western Wall that housed biblical structures in and around that area. By the way, at the time that happened, Arafat, lovely Arafat, lied and said they were digging under the Dome of the Rock, which they were not, which led to untold amounts of bloodshed. Anyway, that's why a JVP was founded then, a JVP. Around 2002, a new and different organization sprung up, known as simply Jewish Voice for Peace, JVP. With almost the same name, they piggybacked off of the original organization so they could claim Kaplan as the Jewish founder, but it was no longer the same group. They had a new attitude, they had new fundraising goals, they had a new mission. Suddenly, they weren't so concerned with the peace process anymore. They were concerned with hurting Jews' reputation and hurting Jews' future, specifically in Israel, but also worldwide. They started in hard with a bunch of BDS nonsense, going out of their way to state this thing that we've now heard 1,000 times, that BDS isn't actually anti-Semitic. All of this stuff that we hear today about how anti-Zionist isn't anti-Semitic, calling for Intifada isn't anti-Semitic, saying praise be our martyrs isn't anti-Semitic. They were the ones that really started all of that. We'll get into a little later some other initiatives that they started that got picked up by vehemently anti-Jewish groups later on. But we'll begin with BDS. As if to solidify their garbage perspective, they followed that up with a bunch of essays and eventually a book explaining to everybody that anti-Semitism isn't anti-Semitism. Just to give you a few examples of how cynically not Jewish this group is, check out these 3 amazing examples. First, I mentioned this one in a previous video, but it bears repeating because, first of all, it's incredible, and second of all, it specifically pertains to JVP. There are groups all over the US known as Students for Justice in Palestine, SJP. Little different, but not as different as you might think. They go by a handful of names. Here are a few. Students for Palestinian Equal Rights, Students Against Israeli Apartheid, Solidarity for Palestinian Human Rights. They have a lot of aliases, always the sign of a clean organization. Anyway, it's a, let's be kind and call it an activist group that's been called, and I quote, vile, obscene, and criminal, and has now been banned on several college campuses for hate speech, supporting terrorism, and anti-Semitism. So a number of years ago, that group's founder, Dr. Hatem Bazian, tweeted something out that confused a lot of people, including people on his own side. Jake Tapper had done a segment on CNN about Israel and Palestine, and it wasn't that it was even pro-Israel or anti-Palestinian, it was just telling the facts on the ground. In response to that segment, Bazian himself tweeted out, and I quote, Jake Tapper, your reporting on Rashida Tlaib's Nakba 75 event was racist and anti-Palestinian. As Jews who believe in human rights and justice, we demand you do better, unquote. Oops, as Jews. That's weird. That guy's not a Jew. You see, he'd forgotten to switch over his account before he tweeted on behalf of JVP. And for a raging Muslim anti-Semite with ties to Hamas to write as a Jew struck a couple people as odd. Let's say odd. So let's call it a big oopsie, right? Here's the best part. His fellow Hamas-affiliated followers didn't realize he had tweeted that out by accident, and they thought there was some strategy, some plan that he was working on. And so they took to their regular accounts with their regular Muslim, Arab, Palestinian, Jew-hating names, and they tweeted out the exact same thing, copy-paste, as a Jew, each of them, to a letter. From screenshots and all the rest that has been saved over time, I personally found 12 accounts that tweeted this out, but I'm sure there were many more at the time. The minute he realized his mistake, he deleted his, and all of those other people deleted theirs as well. And then a little while later, JVP's account tweeted almost verbatim the exact same thing. Curious, huh? Almost miraculous. Number 2. In 2019, Facebook added a feature to their groups pages to make things more transparent for users. The way they put it, they were, and I quote, showing information to help you better understand the purpose of a page and see actions taken by the people who manage and post content. Well, this did the hell out of that. You see, once that feature was put in place, anyone who did just a little bit of digging, it didn't even take that much effort, could find out who was controlling each page, and more importantly, where they were located in the world while they were controlling those pages. And right there, on the screen, in black and white, undeniably, was the information that One of the page managers of JVP's Facebook page was located in Lebanon. That story was broken by a guy named David Lang on a webpage called Israeli Cool. Lang noted in a follow-up article that almost immediately after he publicized this information, JVP wiped that information clean. It wasn't there anymore, just scrubbed from the internet. So yeah, seems legit. Number 3 example, and my personal favorite, their book on anti-Semitism. Yes, they have one. It's on anti-Semitism. It's not against anti-Semitism. It is, let's be kind again and say about anti-Semitism. And I'm sure you'll be shocked to find out it was written by anti-Semites. Weird, not what I would have expected, actually. For instance, one author is the Jew-hating, Sharia-loving, lie-spouting, vile, putrid Linda Sarsour. If you don't know her, I'll give you a little glimpse. Just last month, she called all the hostage posters of the children that had been kidnapped by Hamas a Jewish conspiracy. She's just, what a spicy shitball she is. I won't even get into how much Bernie Sanders and Barack Obama love this trash fire of a human being and platform her. But that's not all. Are you ready for this? The co-author of the anti-Semitism book is the co-founder of the BDS movement. His name is Omar Barghouti. He's a Palestinian who the New York Daily News calls, and I quote, a skilled propagandist that piles falsehood upon falsehood in an effort to end Israel as a Jewish nation. Such a sweetheart, such the right guy to write a book about anti-Semitism. He really knows what he's talking about. So does Linda Sarsour. They're actually experts in the subject. Not exactly in the way you would want an author of a book about that to be, but still. That book, as you can imagine, is mostly about how there is no anti-Semitism. In fact, they go so far as to say that getting mad about anti-Semitism is weaponizing anti-Semitism. Whoa, that's a mind blow right there. And actually, you'll find an article in The Guardian not long ago that actually says Jews should stop weaponizing the Holocaust. So this is a recurring theme amongst these beautiful people. In short, the theme of the book is you shouldn't call anti-Semites anti-Semites because it's not very nice. Also, please stop trying to make it hard to kill you because the Holocaust happened so very long ago. It's about time we get to do it again. So yeah, I guess it's not social justice if you are allowed to point out their hypocrisy. Speaking of social justice, let's talk about JVP's actual platform, if you can call it that. Obviously, as you may have picked up by now, their platform is make the Jews look bad and help the Palestinian cause. But those are merely goals, not campaigns. They actually have 3 major campaigns that make up the tripod of what they believe should be happening right now. Let's go over all 3. The first of their biggest initiatives is called Not on Our Dime. And this one targets the Central Fund of Israel. That's the name of the group, the Central Fund of Israel. It's a New York-based nonprofit that works with all sorts of nonprofits within Israel, helping out the Jewish people. A few of the groups that they work with are, for instance, Israeli Big Brother, Big Sister, La'ofek, which is a group that specifically helps out Ethiopian Jews in Israel, Mehalev Latzalachat, which provides meals for the elderly, Shutaf, which helps adults and teens with disabilities, Emda, which works with Alzheimer's patients, the Foundation for the Welfare of Holocaust Survivors, and about 500 other organizations similar to those. And all of the donations that come in and go out are documented, verified, and scrutinized as they would be with any 501c3 organization. JVP's goal with this particular initiative is to stop all donations going to this group and hurt all 500 or more than 500 nonprofit organizations that help out the Jews. They do this by claiming that the Central Fund of Israel are solely a front for financing illegal settlements, which is patently untrue. In other words, the whole goal of initiative number 1, Not on Our Dime, is to hurt Israelis and Jews in need, period. Next, the second of their big campaigns is called No Tech for Apartheid. This targets Project Nimbus. It's this massive over $1 billion project done between the government of Israel and Amazon and Google, and the design of the project is to help the citizens of Israel with bureaucracy and healthcare and education and, very importantly, not surveillance. This has been stated time and again and been documented. Not so, say the JVP with their trademark Jew hatred and trademark lying as well. According to them, it is only about surveillance. And somehow they also claim it is going to help kill Palestinians. Somehow. In other words, yet another initiative designed specifically to hurt the Jews by making a bunch of shit up. JVP's final important campaign is called Deadly Exchange. This one is the most insidious of all. It specifically vilifies Israeli soldiers and police for working with American law enforcement. To explain what JVP is trying to say, what they're trying to point out is the problem with this, I'll quote their website. It says, "In these programs, worst practices are shared to promote and extend discriminatory and repressive policing in both countries. These include racial profiling, massive spying and surveillance, deportation and detention, and attacks on human rights defenders." All of which is, of course, I think you get the idea now, totally false. Their tagline for this initiative for Deadly Exchange is, "Palestine is here." The inference, of course, being that the Israeli cop tactics supposedly used on the Palestinians that they are teaching to the American law enforcement are the same techniques that the American ACAB cops are going to be using against the Black population. At best, it assumes correlation without causation. It's like when you say that crime goes up on hot days and ice cream sales goes up on hot days. So I wonder if there's a connection between crime and ice cream sales without saying that hot days make both of those things rise. One has nothing to do with one another. But putting aside correlation without causation, when you look at what the Israeli cops actually did with American law enforcement, it further denigrates the whole concept of this supposed initiative. Those sessions with Israeli law enforcement and Israeli soldiers, which, by the way, lasted 2 weeks maximum, were about the Israeli soldiers teaching how to combat hate crimes, how to stop mass shootings, how to recruit from minority communities in order to make the squad more diverse. All of these things, of course, if you really think about it, would help the Black community if implemented correctly. In other words, it's the opposite of what they claim. Now, some of you might recall from my previous video, this is exactly what the Muslims teach when they teach about propaganda. I don't know if you remember, but there was a video leaked by a Muslim teaching other Muslims how to use social media and propaganda to win the war without a shot being fired. Racism was their #1 tool. Make the Arabs the Black people, make the Jews the bad whites. JVP, unsurprisingly, followed the Hamas playbook to a T when it came to propaganda. And post George Floyd, they went hard on this campaign. They doubled down. They really saw their moment to hurt the Jewish community. And everyone in America, at least, were so busy bowing down to BLM while praying that our houses didn't get burned down in some riot or that we didn't get canceled along the way, that we didn't notice that they were slowly and falsely making all the Jews the people who taught Derek Chauvin how to kneel on a neck. As if their Jew hatred and their appropriation of racism wasn't already super obvious. JVP even launched a new division of their organization that basically was JVP in blackface, called JOC, Jews of Color. Shameless. You can already imagine what it is, but here's a little taste of their manifesto. I'll read it directly. "We have witnessed our cultures destroyed and appropriated in service to the white supremacism and settler militarism that are at the basis of Zionism." They go on to use all the right buzzwords like intersectional and anti-racist that makes it falsely seem like the Palestinian cause is part of the BLM movement or something. So that's 3 for 3 of the JVP major campaigns that do nothing but damage, defame, and disparage the Jews. But don't worry, they're not anti-Semitic. They keep telling you that over and over again. In fact, you should read their book. You know, the one about anti-Semitism written by the Jew-hating Palestinians. And if that's not enough for you, pick up some of their Jewish holiday aids, like their Passover Haggadah. Very Jewish, in fact. So Jewish that instead of the 3rd glass of wine being saved for Elijah, they save it for BDS activists. I'm not kidding. Instead of reading the 10 plagues of Egypt with the Pharaoh, they read the 10 crimes of Israel against the Palestinian people. Instead of concluding the whole thing with next year in Jerusalem, they end with next year in Al-Quds. I know this sounds like a bad SNL sketch, but sadly, it's very, very real. And there are a bunch of people who pick this thing up thinking it's sanctioned by Jewish voices. That's why I'm doing this episode. That's why I'm pointing out the hypocrisy here, that they are not Jewish, that they are not our voice, and they are not for peace. These are the arbiters, all of a sudden, of how Jews should do Judaism right. That's probably why they invite Rashida Tlaib to come co-host Shabbat in the park. I mean, who better to light the candles and commemorate the day God rested after completing the universe than a politician financed by Hamas? Speaking of the people that they host, their guests, my father told me a long time ago, if you want to know someone's character, Don't look at them, look at who their friends are. So with that in mind, let's take a step back and look at who the associates to JVP are. Maybe I'll get my mind changed. Maybe we'll be surprised by all the, oh no, I see here convicted terrorist murderers. No, that didn't work out at all. For instance, Rasmea Odeh, a homicide bomber with the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, convicted of murdering 2 people in a supermarket bombing in Jerusalem and for planting a bomb in the British consulate. But if she's a prisoner, why is she out of prison? Oh, of course. As usual, and you've all witnessed it recently in case you didn't know it before, the only reason she was allowed out of prison is because her terrorist organization kidnapped an Israeli soldier, and that soldier was later traded for 78 convicted terrorists who had been in prison in Israel, including her. Things just go round and round in history, huh? Time is just a flat circle and all that. Anyway, JVP hosted her as a guest of honor at their national membership meeting, and they called her a, quote, deeply respected Palestinian organizer. Another guy they love and praise and want to host is a guy named Marwan Barghouti, no relation to the other Barghouti piece of shit that they work with. This one is a convicted murderer responsible for the first and second Intifada and the deaths of hundreds of people. In fact, he called for a third Intifada just a few years before JVP picked him up and started exalting him as a great guy. I could list one name after another of all the people they've hosted, of all the people they've platformed, of all the people they've supported, and every single one of them is a terrible Jew hater, a Palestinian activist, a Muslim that's trying to destroy Israel, and on and on. So the associates they've invited in have been bad enough. But if you want to know more, go to social media, check out Twitter or X or whatever it's called now, and go look at the staff members of JVP. When you go to their pages, it tells you other people to follow that tweet in the same vein that have the same kind of perspective. So to choose one at random from their staff roster, I chose Beth Miller, political director of JVP. When you go to her page and click on similar to Beth Miller, here's who comes up on the list. First, Ehab Judeh, Palestinian human rights activist. Next, a reporter and the associate editor of the Electronic Intifada, an anti-Jewish publication. After that is a Palestinian advocacy organization based in the US, a Palestinian-American writer, a lecturer and professor of settler colonialism, race, and decolonization in Palestine. After that, a group called Palestine Legal, which is a legal group that helps out people who are arrested for violent crimes while being activists for the Palestinian cause. After that, the head of legal research and advocacy for Al-Haq, the Palestinian group. Next, Adalah, which is a legal justice center protecting the human rights of Palestinian citizens, and on and on. I could do this all day, but as you can see, there isn't one thing on that list that is Jewish in any way, or peaceful, really. Even the ones that have peace in the title, as you can probably pick up by now, are not actually so. Worse yet, when you go into her page to see what she's been tweeting, it is all anti-Jewish, pro-Palestinian blather, doubling down on the idea that buildings and built-up neighborhoods are refugee camps, repeating Hamas talking points, repeating the death numbers that Hamas makes up. She retweets Palestinian and Muslim leaders who are lying about what Israel and the Israeli army are doing while they are in Gaza and while they are working in the West Bank. She even goes so far as to retweet lies that are provably false. Things like saying that there's never been any command center under the hospitals, or Israel is deliberately bombing safe zones. Things that you can see, even from the biased news, are not true. My favorite of her retweeted lies is that Fatah is just a peaceful resistance movement. Fatah, need I remind you, is the Palestinian National Liberation Movement and was founded by Arafat. It's part of the PLO. I don't think we've all forgotten that the PLO is a terrorist organization that pretty much started the whole trend of hijacking airplanes. In Arabic, that group's name translates to Harakat al-Tahrir al-Watani il-Falastini. All they've done is made a reverse acronym. Instead of it being H-T-A-F, they went backwards. Falastini is first, then al-Watani, then Tahrir, then Harakat. F-A-T-H, pronounced in English as Fatah. They're not even hiding the ball. It's like using pig Latin and hoping that no one's going to know what you're saying. By the way, do you know what the name even means? Because obviously Beth Miller from JVP either doesn't or does and is deliberately lying to you. Fatah actually refers to actual Muslim colonialism. It means conquering, and in this case refers specifically to conquering the Levant. What is the Levant? Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and part of Turkey. By who? Invaders coming up from the Arabian Peninsula. What makes up the Arabian Peninsula? Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Yemen, as well as the southern part of Iraq and the southern part of Jordan. Almost all of the places in the Levant are not on that list, and specifically and most importantly, not Israel. There couldn't be a group less indigenous to the region than the Muslims, and there couldn't be a group less colonialist to the region than the Jews. It's all lies. And people like Beth Miller and her ilk, the Jews that we've been talking about, who are part of JVP, and all the non-Jews and fake Jews who are part of JVP, repeat this kind of stuff ad infinitum, making sure that they shove it down your throat. These are their colleagues. These are their compatriots. These are their comrades. And these are the people that you need to define them by, both their actions and their associates. Now, there's a lot more I could go into here about JVP. There's actually so much more in the research that I found, and some of it is particularly damning, but I also don't want to make this episode an hour and a half long. So I'm going to split this into two. I didn't know I was going to do this until I got to this point and saw that we're already over 40 minutes in. In other words, this is part 1 of 2. I hope you come back for the second part, because there is some crazy stuff of everything you've heard here that is already pretty wild. You have to admit, the stuff that's coming up is just as crazy, if not crazier, in terms of who the leaders associate with, in terms of what else the group has been working to accomplish, in terms of what they've put into the public consciousness, and in terms of what they've done on behalf of Jews using the Jewish voice, libeling and smearing Jews left and right by pretending to be something they're not. Every time they block a road, every time they stop a highway during rush hour, every time they block the runway at LAX, they make people say, those people are assholes. And that means Jews are assholes. They're putting us in the crosshairs by doing that. The second thing that they're doing is making sure that everyone hears, oh, even the Jews don't want this war. Even the Jews don't want Israel to defend itself. These are lies. And it's not just that these are professional liars or pathological liars or something. These are people who have a job to do, and they are doing it. And their job, again, is hurt the Jews worldwide, make them a target. And second of all, make the world believe that even the Jews don't support this war. Make sure the Palestinians seem like the victims. Make sure they are put up on a pedestal and they can do no wrong, despite doing wrong every single time we see them gather. I'm going to repeat something I said at the beginning of this episode, which is, it is important for somebody to be shouting from the rooftops over and over and over again that this group and groups like it are not Jewish, are not our voice, and are not for peace. And because this is America, and we can't just shut people up that we don't like, we have to know when we can stop listening, when we can stop believing them, when we can stop putting them in the category of trusted sources. It's time for everyone to stop listening to JVP. I hope that so far this has provided you with at least some ammunition that you can use against the people that come at you with misinformation. Until next time, I appreciate you giving me your time. Continue thinking of me as a resource, and I will see you on the next episode of Jew Can't Handle the Truth.